Hello, how's it going? This is Greg with Aeres Chronicles, and we are back with an episode of the Aeres Chronicler where I interview independent creators in the RPG world, video game space, artists, and everything in between. Last one was 8 months ago where I interviewed Crafty Matt about professional gaming. And today we have a special guest, Alexander Johnson. He is a talented artist, and he also created a tabletop role-playing game called Woodlander, which is probably going to be the penultimate animal fantasy game in the spirit of Redwall.
Hopefully.
Now, just a quick disclaimer, I have played the game. I know Alex. He's an artist that's working with me for one of our books as well, for Aeres 2nd edition. But that will not bias me in any way towards him. Actually, yes, it will. But that's okay. So we're going to just start out a little bit with your history. Alex, can you tell us about your history as an artist first? Where did you start and how did you end up drawing characters predominantly in the animal fantasy genre?
I've always liked drawing. It's always been a hobby of mine. And I've always sort of drawn things that I connected with, things that I liked. And really early on, the Redwall series, like as a kid, became my favorite book series. So it and similar media, I draw my own sort of ideas in that vein. I'd draw characters I'd make up for little stories I'd make in my head. Usually things based on like enactments I did with like toys and action figures and that sort of thing. So just a way to sort of express my own ideas and work through and develop those ideas. In high school, I got a lot more serious about considering art as a career. So I majored in visual arts in college. Since then, I'd largely been doing art sort of freelance as a side gig. Recently, I've been trying to do that full time as my full time employment for the past couple of years.
How's that been working out?
I've been very productive, very prolific, at the very least. But the market's always very competitive. You always got to stay on top of trying to market yourself and be appealing to your potential audience.
Yeah, I agree. It's annoying for me because I'd rather be purely creative and not business minded at all and not have to worry about the business side of any of that because it's boring. But sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Is that the same way for you?
Pretty much.
Did you go to the Art Institute or what?
No, I went to the University of Illinois in Springfield, majoring in visual arts. Not as robust of an art education as I might have preferred, but it was education.
Yeah. Did you start off as like an animator, or did you go straight into?
No, I've always been. Originally, I was interested in illustrating for children's books, but that market's even more competitive and sort of closed off. So I haven't been able to get into that market. But I'm still illustrating books. Obviously, yours, I've done illustrations for, and am currently doing. I've done various other book projects for other clients over the years.
Yeah. Cool. As far as role-playing games are concerned, you've illustrated your book, which we're going to talk about here in just a minute, and my book and you also worked with me a little bit on something we released in 2023, which is our Wilderkind book for Castles and Crusades. Have you done any other RPG, like official published RPG work before then?
No, not that I can remember. Um, like I said, up until recently, like for a few years I was just sort of sticking to my office job and just doing like individual commissions as a side gig. Yours was the first book that I did any sort of work for role playing games.
Cool. Well, that's awesome then. I guess that was a good start. So, when you first started drawing stuff, and you mentioned that you obviously grew up with Redwall
Yes.
and movies like that and books like that, and I did too. Did you start off like early on with like comic book style characters, or more like cartoons, like a Ren and Stimpy type of influence, and then you moved on into the animal fantasy stuff, or have you always been like really focused on like that side of fantasy when it comes to your
Um,
illustration?
it would really depend on what I was interested in at the time. Like I said, I'd sort of try to recreate or put my own spin on the things I was interested in. So I've taken inspiration from uh, very like comics, mainly like David Peterson's work, the author and creator of Mouse Guard, and the various illustrations in the Redwall books themselves prompted me to try something similar. I was especially drawn to the work of Gary Chalk and Sean Rubin. But in terms of other media, um, I grew up watching Cartoon Network, like Dexter's Lab and like Ed and Eddie and stuff. So Gendy Tartakovsky has been a big influence. So Samurai Jack and the original Clone Wars shorts, his art style and his sort of cinematography
Yeah,
was also a big influence. So I take inspiration from a wide array of sources. Um, Before I was interested in Redwall, I wasn't really drawing anything specific, um, other than just general fantasy, I guess. Um, I had my own odd ideas. Like I was big into Transformers for a while, and I was drawing those back in like first and second grade. But Redwall was the first one that I really clicked with me, that I've stuck with the longest. So obviously, I'm very fond of similar characters and similar settings. Another big influence, I think, was around the same time my family got a pet hamster, and then
yeah.
shortly after that, a pet chinchilla, and I really liked them. So I've always had a soft spot for little critters, little rodents, because of that.
Same here. So, some of the artists you told us about as inspiration for you are known or famous for their kind of minimalist approach in a lot of cases,
Mhm.
and dynamic action, a lot of movement and action in the characters and their poses, and you know, it's very cinematic in a way. And I see that a lot in your personal work and some of the work you're doing for RPGs. Do you consider yourself more like into that type of like heavy, dynamically action-oriented stuff rather than just your still life?
Yeah, like I said, Genny Tartakovsky has been a big influence, at least in terms of how I like visual storytelling, because he's very big on action, strong poses, um, especially in the early like Samurai Jack and Clone Wars stuff. Those had very minimal
Yeah.
dialogue. They were very visually striking, which I think left a big impact, a big impact on me. Um, and it's the age-old saying of actions speak louder than words, and why spend 100 words to say what you can say in 10? So I and I have dabbled in animation and like cartooning, a bit over the years, and the major principles in those areas of those artistic media is, strong silhouettes and character designs. Obviously, like the animation especially is very, very like it focuses on motion, obviously, because it's
Of course.
animated. So you need strong, clear body language and expressions to help convey what's going on, not just dialogue.
Yeah, exactly. Visual storytelling is very important for me as well. Now, one other point in the art world that I wanted to ask you about before we continue onward. You're well known among people who talk to you and commissioned art from you, done projects with you, as being kind of this king of wholesome art. Like you don't do any kind of like super
Raunchy.
I wouldn't, yeah, you don't do like raunchy stuff. You're not your typical like not safe for work artist.
No.
Has that always been your vision or your like personal virtues? Like, led you down that path?
Yeah, I've always liked to keep things very wholesome, very straightforward, I guess you could say. Like I grew up with Disney, and like Redwall itself is very big on like cozy, wholesome family fun and vibes. And so like I've never been big on horror movies or like adult media because like it just doesn't click. It's not really a priority for me. So
Yeah,
I like a universal appeal. So keeping things, like like focusing on the small things in life, making characters that are appealing just for who they are rather than what they are.
exactly.
I think is important.
Do you hear that, all my Twitter users? For those of you picking up our Padfoot Alley sequel that Alex is working on, do not expect to find any sexy rats in the book, except for maybe one. There could one might sneak in. That's about all. That's as far as we're gonna go with that. So don't expect anything crazy. But speaking of that, the Thorn Hollow book and Woodlander, how did you get started with like RPGs? I know you probably played, a little bit here and there into your teenage years. Did you play D&D at all, or tell us more about that?
Well, I've been interested in role playing games for about as long as I've been interested in Redwall and those sorts of stories. So it kind of goes hand in hand. So I think back in about 2001, my dad introduced my brothers and I to the original Hero Quest board game. As I think he was deliberately trying to like open us up to role playing games because that's meant to be an introductory sort of experience. Um,
Oh
sort
yeah,
of D&D adjacent, sort of like streamlined approach to dungeon delving and dealing with the various classes like barbarian, wizard, that sort of thing. And we really liked that, and we played through the whole game. It took us weeks, maybe months. I don't remember quite at this point. And so we really liked that. My twin brother and I liked it, I think, more than I think our younger brother. He was more into Magic the Gathering.
yeah.
But so our dad later introduced to other like proper tabletop role playing systems. So I think we played a little bit of D&D third edition. There was a Star Wars role playing game. We did a little bit of Call of Cthulhu, but we mainly stuck with D20 Modern, which is basically just modern D&D.
Right, yeah.
At least modern for the early 2000s. my brother was big into like zombies for a while, so we were playing Dead Rain in high school, in middle school, and a system called Obsidian. So we had a variety. I haven't really played any of them in quite a while, though.
Oh, Obsidian.
Past
That's
high
an
school,
obscure one.
sorry.
Yeah, people don't talk about Obsidian these days. That's an obscure one.
Well, my dad collects board games and role playing games, so he had a wide selection to introduce us to. I'm not sure. I think he just tried different genres just to see what we liked and what stuck with us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome to have, that kind of sport. Obviously, your dad helped you introduce a lot of concepts, and then you played with your brother. Did you have like a big high school group like I did, or did you have like guys that came over?
We had some friends in high school that we played with regularly. Eventually, we started like an after school role playing club that I think it's still going on now. Maybe not. I haven't checked in on it, but it did eventually sort of expand into board games and card games. Especially after we left, the role playing game stuff kind of dropped off.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were playing pretty regularly for a while, taking turns as game masters for different systems, as well as being players.
We obviously had a strong foundation in the RPG world. I'm going to guess that since working on Woodlander, your own RPG, your knowledge of this kind of universe / community has probably exploded. Like, the OSR and all these different games and things like that.
Yeah, I've done over the past several years, while I've been playtesting and developing Woodlander, I've expanded my knowledge of different systems, and I've learned about different movements, trying out different, like seeing what they did, what I thought might work for my system, what rules, mechanics, just expanding my knowledge beyond Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yeah,
because that's the go-to ubiquitous system.
And Woodlander is a little bit different. So tell us about Woodlander, how you got started in developing that game. I know you've been working on it for a long time now. Give us a basic premise of Woodlander and why, maybe a few reasons why RPG players, even those who are not into animal fantasy at all, like give me some reasons that they might enjoy it or like want to be into it.
Well, it takes cues from a number of systems. I describe it probably as like a mix of Pathfinder, second edition, like OSR, and maybe a little bit of Fate and Burning Wheel, in terms of how it works and what sort of mechanics it's concerned with. So even disregarding the subject matter, like the genre, it's intended to simulate the genre of fantasy. I've tried to expand upon and refine conventions and rules for things like travel and exploration, resource management, things that I liked the idea of and thought would suit my design goals, that I've seen in other games, but didn't necessarily agree with how they were conducted or like what the exact rules were, but I liked the sentiments. So something a little bit more detailed, a little bit more expansive, something concerned more with the wider world, rather than just like you often see, just like very narrow dungeon delving, like 5-room dungeon delving, and purely combat, like you'd see, like you get a lot with D&D and other similar systems. So it's sort of meant to be a very comprehensive experience, depending on what the players and the game master want to focus on.
So, yeah, absolutely. In the past 6-7 months since you've been finishing the game,
Yeah.
some other influences probably were not intentional on your part, but comparisons have come to light.
Yeah.
People have compared it to Mithras in terms of the strategic combat. And of course, there's Axe and Axe 2, Adventure Conquer King system by Alexander McCrease. Because he used to have a motto that said, Woodlander has a rule for that, right? That's the
Yeah.
same motto that Axe has. And I think at one point you mentioned that Woodlander was over 500 pages long. Is that correct?
Yeah. At one point, I did some consolidation to try to streamline things a little bit since then. So it's more after formatting, it's up to about 400 pages.
Yeah.
Of course, it's sort of like the player's handbook, game master's guide, and monster manual rolled into one. So it wasn't going to be a short book by any means.
Yeah, this is a game master, game player book. This is a book for people who like role-playing games. It's got your art in it, scattered throughout.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, it's just a pure game and subject matter, which is refreshing. And the book is in black and white. Why did you decide to go in the kind of the old school black and white, and rather than the big flamboyant, color stuff that you see today?
Well, some financial reasons, like in terms of printing costs, time, and like workload reasons. Because I'm not only am I the one writing it, I'm the one making the art for it. I'm an artist, so I might as well, right? Just I wanted to be consistent, and I like drawing, but I'm one guy. I didn't want to go crazy, but also mainly I wanted to adhere to the same sort of like paperback novel kind of feel that I get from my own copies of the Redwall books, where they have, like, they're not chock full of illustrations. They have like a map and some chapter illustrations to help give an impression of what to expect in the upcoming story for that chapter. So something, simple, straightforward, but elegant and effective.
Yeah, that's a very old school direction. I think a lot of players and people who pick up the book are going to appreciate that greatly, because nowadays, if you look like at a Wizards of the Coast book or another really mainstream RPG, you're just inundated with design, like overwhelming amounts of
Overproduced.
Yeah, they're overproduced. My books are fairly flashy and design heavy. I don't think they're overproduced by any means, but I go in a different direction. But I think what you're doing there is certainly admirable. And printing costs are insane for black and white compared to color. I mean, there's a totally worlds apart.
Yeah, I wanted it to make it, simple, straightforward to read, like, but also very accessible in terms of getting it out there and getting it printed and published for others to enjoy.
For sure. Let's talk about the game a little bit. So most people looking at Woodlander are going to come from some kind of Dungeons and Dragons background. But Woodlander does not play like Dungeons and Dragons exactly. Now, of course, there are some similarities between that and a lot of different fantasy games, such as wilderness encounters and wilderness travel, and delving strange ruins and things like that.
Yes.
Those are thematic considerations rather than necessarily gameplay considerations. But what is the first thing, in your opinion, an average Dungeons and Dragons, let's say an OSR, like average D&D player, what are they going to notice that's dramatically different? They're going to step back and say, whoa, this is a totally different experience.
Well, regardless of edition, the character creation is very different. It's a bit more detailed in terms of describing what your character can do, because the characters aren't human, so they're animals, so they all have their own unique features and abilities that they can perform that humans and humanoid characters like elves and dwarves just can't really do. So that's one consideration. It's coming from something like 5th edition. Like I said, I wanted to make something a little bit more robust, especially in terms of world building and engaging with the world from the character's point of view. So there are a lot more considerations for things like resource and time management, and wilderness exploration. Travel and exploration are dealt with a lot more procedurally in terms of gameplay. For the OSR people, that'll sound very familiar, but the rules themselves are a bit different in terms of how the time is managed, and like what that means for the characters, as well as at least in terms of traveling. It's a bit more granular. So, but in some ways also, like I've described Woodlander as a mix of old school sensibilities with a more modern design. So the design itself is a bit more narrative focused, similar to something like the Powered by the Apocalypse games or Fate. But the design concerns were focused on very old school ideas of like rationing your supplies, managing light sources, resting and recovery is a lot more gritty. Combat's more gritty, so you're not superheroes. You're not going to feel like superheroes like you might in something like 5th edition, but you're not quite as squishy as you might be in an old like OSR game.
Right. So it's a D6 game, is that correct?
Yes, that's one major difference. It's just the D6 pool. So your level of skill is dependent on how many dice you roll, rather than adding modifiers to a number.
So you've described the core of the game as being primarily, in some ways, it's similar to like a Fate style game, but in other ways, mechanically and systematically, it's similar to an old school wilderness exploration game. So in my mind, that makes it kind of a decision-based game. So the players their decisions are weighted very heavily rather than random rolls against certain criteria being the most important thing. Is that safe to say, or
decisions definitely do matter? The players are intended to be very cautious, very strategic in how they deal with things, but it's still reliant on emergent storytelling to some degree, emergent gameplay, because it's focused on exploration and discovery. So things are meant to feel a bit more spontaneous, a bit more unpredictable in some ways. And it's up to the players to contend with the obstacles and adversity that might arise based on their decisions. One mechanic I developed to help manage the consequences of decisions and prompt things like random encounters and other consequences is a special like in-game timer tied to tension. So like tension points will accumulate based on what the players decide to do and how the characters conduct themselves. So tension will always be ticking up. It's just, do you do like, if you do you do something reckless that might have like a very immediate and powerful effect, but would cause a lot of tension to mount up, potentially triggering some unwanted consequence, typically a random encounter? Or do you play it safe and go like the scenic route, slow and steady, but maybe inconvenience yourself in the short term?
Yeah, so time management in games like this, especially D&D, has been a contentious topic recently, especially with different people talking about one-to-one time, which primarily concerns itself with how the game world progresses equal to the real clock in downtime.
Yes.
So that's mainly to do with downtime, but your system is different. So somebody coming in trying to do a critical role style, like heavily top-down narrative storytelling game is going to be overwhelmed because the system is, I mean, not to say that you can't possibly change things or do it in that way, but it's not designed for that. It's more for emergent storytelling. So
yes, you could definitely try to have some scripted events here and there, but it's meant to be a little bit more unpredictable because as a game master, I find sort of going with the flow and being a little bit more spontaneous is more enjoyable than trying to railroad people down a set path, because then you have the panic attack of, oh no, they didn't do what I thought they would do.
right.
And you could definitely, railroading is going to happen probably no matter what, and you can certainly try to stick to a more scripted path, but it's not really intended to be like a novel. It's more of you have a framework that you follow, like you have a goal, a mission. It's up to you to figure out how to accomplish that mission.
So a Redwall-esque story would emerge from the circumstances of the game world rather than just being dumped upon the players from the game master, pretty much.
That would be the ideal outcome, yes, the intended outcome.
Yeah. So the tension system, you just talked about it briefly. Excuse me. It seems to me that what you're describing is a very old school system, in that time progresses in real time in the game. Now, older versions of D&D had wandering monsters and things like, sometimes they were treated in that manner. But what you're saying is, unlike a lot of the fantasy games that people play today, it's not paused. Like if you're not just going to sit there and fiddle around trying to decide what to do next for 15 minutes, because things can happen, tension could constantly be building, and that has a dramatic impact on the game.
Not quite. It's you're describing something more along the lines of Shadow Dark's torch timer mechanic.
Okay.
That's not how tension works. Like, you can still pause the game and discuss, like, do some table talk to discuss what you want to do. But then when things unpause and you move forward, the character's actions are what determine how much tension is accrued.
Sure.
So, like, certain actions, like any risky actions, like any conspicuous actions that might expose your character to a potential enemy or put themselves or their equipment at risk, will by default accumulate at least 1 point of tension. Sometimes, like, depending on it, like because it'll accrue no matter what you're doing, whether you're resting, whether you're in combat, whether you're like dungeon crawling or traveling in the overworld, because it's the main engine of how to get things like random encounters and other sort of interesting events to happen, and to help regulate the consumption of resources and things like character fatigue and that sort of things, rather than relying on an arbitrary amount of time. Like the game master's like, oh, it's been like, I don't know, this long since you guys rested. I feel like it's time for this. But so tension's always going to be building up in the background. And at a certain point, something will happen. It'll trigger something. And different, what the players do, like what the characters do, sort of speeds that up at different rates. So the more zoomed in, so like combat's very zoomed in. It's very, very action heavy, very risk heavy. So it's going to be accumulating tension a lot faster in universe.
Sure.
It's like 1 point per round, essentially. So, and a round's only like 10 seconds. So you're gonna get, if you're in combat for more than a few rounds, you're probably gonna experience something bad happening.
So it's an in-universe consideration rather than like a meta type of gaming thing that happens.
Yeah, it's like the players will be aware, like, oh no, we probably shouldn't go that way. We should take this shortcut to minimize how long we're wandering around, because that's like, if you're wandering around a dungeon for too long, you're building up tension. Like how many rooms or areas you travel through in a dungeon, or like how far you travel in a single day while you're traveling. So like if you march for hours on end, you're more likely to run into something, like run into wildlife, or like your character's going to be fatigued or something like that. So like planning your course, like planning ahead, strategizing, like don't just rush in sword swinging and like get into a prolonged fight, because you're very likely to experience some sort of setback due to tension.
Makes a lot of sense. I was mainly asking because there's some game masters, and I think actually Gary Gygax might have done this, although I could be remembering wrong. So anyone listening in, feel free to correct me in the comments. But basically, if it was your turn, you had like 30 seconds. It was treated almost like a drill sergeant. If you took longer than 30 seconds to make your decision, you lost your turn and we moved on to the next person. So it's like, you don't really encourage anything like that, or do you have those type of guidelines in the game?
I don't like doing that, just because it puts pressure on the players, and I myself I don't think well under pressure, obviously. But I mean, you could do that, and you could just say, okay, your character goes last in initiative, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Which that's certainly an option. That's more of like table culture than game mechanics.
But you do. So in the book, do you have a section on like guidelines for GMs, like how to build the campaign, how to play the game, that type of thing?
Yeah, I've got some tools for the game master to use to set up the world and devise things like a central villain, if one is relevant, and other plot hooks. Things like rumors and factions, that sort of thing could come into play.
But do you have any like pre-written adventure paths in the book?
Not currently. I've been thinking of, if my book does well enough, making some supplementary adventure modules later on down the line. Specifically the one shot that you played through the other day.
Yeah.
Maybe fleshing that out a bit more. Right now I'm mostly just focused on getting the rules themselves out there, and then if that does well, focusing on supplementary materials.
And that's actually a plus in my book, because I don't know anyone. Actually, no, I do know one person who has actually used the pre-written adventure in our Irie setting book, but most people seem to not like that. Or it's not like they don't like it, it's that they just don't use it. So it ends up being kind of a waste of space and time.
It's a nice consideration and like good on paper, like a good consideration. But I think most people just want to tell their own stories and use their own settings.
Right.
I've sort of been forced to since there wasn't really a game existing for the genre that I had in mind, at least not when I first started. There's been quite a slew of similar animal fantasy style games, and not just role playing games. Since I first started developing Woodlander, so I was sort of ahead of the curve. But now there are a bunch of competition, I guess.
Well, yours is quite unique because so there are a lot of big names in that genre. You've got your Mouse Guard, of course, Mouse Ritter, Root, the role-playing game, Humblewood.
Yeah.
I believe Humblewood is actually a 5th edition product.
Yeah.
But all of those games differ significantly because you are playing a woodland critter that has more or less the same capabilities as a human being. It's a character that stands on 2 legs and has hands, can grasp tools and use weapons and things like that. And even in Humblewood, where most of the characters are birds, like you play as essentially like a raven or a bird, you've got hands. Like you have a dinosaur. So they're really dinosaurs. Like they're not, I mean, they have wings. Yeah. So it's but your book is completely different in that you treat the species with realism using the game rules.
I try to. That was a big consideration. One thing that was like, as I was investigating these other systems as I was introduced to them, and seeing, like, doing research, like, oh, what did they do? Like, how did they handle this aspect of the genre? And very often I was disappointed with how little detail they went into in terms of really simulating the feel of playing as a non-human character, and not just non-human, but non-humanoid character. And because the animal kingdom's there are a ton of animals out there, and all very distinct. So like playing as a mouse shouldn't feel the same as playing as a badger or a lizard or a bird. So very often they didn't have any considerations. It was just all aesthetic without any mechanical impact.
Especially the Root RPG. I've heard criticisms levied towards that.
Root was very disappointing in that regard. Even something like Mouse Ritter, it's all cosmetic. It's just to convey the idea that you're small, but it doesn't really actually feel any different than playing something like a human fighter in D&D. So I've tried to really expand upon that aspect, defining the animal's different traits and capabilities. So like mice, they've got prehensile tails. They can hold on to things like little objects in their tails. Some have, like hamsters, they got like cheek pouches. If you play a marsupial, if you wanted to make a marsupial, you'd have like belly pouches and things. Some have night vision, so they can see in the dark. Some don't. Some have like bats have echolocation. Birds and bats themselves, they're not bird men. They don't have hands like you were talking about with Humblewood. They're birds. They got wings. They don't have hands. So how they interact with the world is very different, and what they can do is very different.
That's pretty neat, and to be honest, quite jarring if you jump into the game expecting a Humblewood, because as a bird, yes, you can fly, but you can't wield a sword, not unless you like kind of grab it and try and drag it across something, right? Or like, it's a totally different like game experience, which is very interesting. No other games are doing that currently, as far as I know. Now, there may have been some in the past. I don't know, but yours is certainly the biggest that's coming out right now with that type of consideration in it.
Yes, that was one thing that I did strive to do. One thing that I've also observed, which, maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing, depending on what the market likes.
Yeah.
But I know what I want, and I know what my design goals were, and those were it.
Yeah. Exactly. So this question is kind of for the benefit of a lot of my audience who comes from the old school D&D gaming world.
Mm-hmm.
In Woodlander, can you build if you get enough merit or reputation or wealth, or can you build a domain, have your own keep? Can you become a king or a lord among your kind and have henchmen? Do you have anything like that in the game?
You can definitely improve your reputation and your prosperity to feel more like a folk hero, and like even depending on what you do in a campaign, you could become a king or lord or something, depending on what the story is like. It's more like I modeled the intended campaign structure after a typical Redwall story, which is a sort of there and back again sort of journey.
Yeah.
Very similar to The Hobbit, where they have a quest either to maybe defeat a villain, retrieve an item, or some other consideration, traveling to a distant region of the land, going there, maybe accomplishing some minor quests along the way in service of the larger mission, and then sort of coming back again, having grown in character, not so much necessarily in terms of status, but in just accomplishment, actual character growth. And then, so that'd be like one campaign, and then at the start of the next campaign, it'd be like the start of a new book, and some time has gone by, maybe, and your character has maybe they've changed in between stories based on the events of the previous campaign. Like I said, you could maybe you fulfilled some backstory prerequisite and managed to reclaim your character's lost inheritance or something like that. That's been in various stories. And then, like, at the start of the next campaign, maybe you start off a little bit richer, a little bit more prosperous, a little bit more status, and that'll carry over into the next adventure. But your deeds and actions will always impact where your character sits in the grander scheme of things. In terms of establishing a domain, you could certainly have that be a goal of a campaign, or like maybe just a personal goal, if nothing else, if not the main quest. But there are rules for characters that they could start off with. I call them safe havens. You could refer to them as domains, or like headquarters or hideouts.
Okay.
That they could use as a home base, and you could definitely have that, like, based on the previous campaign. Like, if they became affluent enough, influential enough, they could maybe start with like maybe they started a new settlement or built a castle or something, and then you could definitely have that be incorporated into a character's larger story as you accomplish your various quests and adventures.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. That actually does remind me a bit of the old school AD&D first edition domain play.
Yeah.
Because it's not a story game. Instead, the story that you and the players have created in the game follows with you it doesn't. I mean, it can end, but it continues onward, and you explore your descendants and things like that.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's pretty interesting.
that's definitely a possibility. Redwall itself, the series I've used as the main sort of framework for Woodlander. Others include like the Mistmantle Chronicles and even Mouse Guard, even something like Disney's Robin Hood. But in Redwall stories, right, they're very generational. Like the books might have a clear continuity. Some characters might carry over, but it's time is clearly past, like at least a generation or two. So like one character who might have been a child in the previous book might be elderly in the next story, or even dead, and his son or something or children have now taken up the mantle, and it's definitely something that could happen. There are rules for handling like your character aging in between campaigns if it's all happening, if it's not happening like immediately after the previous one. So you can definitely do a lot of character development and growth in that area alone. And one major consideration, as opposed to like old school D&D, is the main focus of gameplay, because those games were focused very much on go to a dungeon, kill some monsters, bring back treasure, rinse and repeat until you were essentially king of the land. That's not necessarily the focus of Woodlander. Like I said, it's more focused on specific missions that define the framework of a narrative, a premise of a larger potential story. So like it could be like defeat this villain before he like amasses an army large enough to conquer the kingdom, or go here and recover, like stop the slave trade from being so, like put an end to the slave trade, since they're like stealing everybody's like children. That was a plot to one of the Redwall books, Medi Mayo. I recommend that one if anyone's interested. So the stories and goals of the protagonists are very varied. So it's not just limited to collecting treasure. Is
cool.
What I'm getting at.
So can you, given the random encounter charts or whatever rules you might have in the book, can you run a zero prep game with Woodlander? Or do you need at least some kind of structural campaign goal in mind going in?
You could definitely run some one shots, like the one I hosted for you. It's just a matter of how zoomed out you want to be in terms of the world building and the preparation. You could, as long as like you technically don't even really need a map, but you do need to at least have an idea of what's in the world. You can just make some general notes, because I've got rules for mapless play, so you could definitely use theater of the mind and go for a simpler, maybe not zero prep, but minimal prep sort of approach. Because the one shot I ran with you was largely theater of the mind, and I put most of that together in an hour or two, just writing down notes in my notebook. The main consideration is just referring to the proper stat block for potential NPCs. I think would be the major consideration in terms of the prep you need to do, and making some random encounters if the ones in the book aren't suitable for the location you have in mind.
Right, exactly. So was what I was about to suggest. Oh, I think the game just sounds wonderful, and I have played it, and it's going to be a 2 thumbs up game for sure. Anyone, if you haven't read Redwall, if you don't know, like you can still go into this and get a lot out of it. I had one more question about the game before we talk briefly about the Kickstarter.
Okay.
Um, if someone was to watch one movie, play one video game, and read one book to get into the mood to play Woodlander, what would those be for you?
Video game, I'd say uh, Tales of Iron is very Redwall-esque, very Woodlander-esque. Um, it's a similar focus on like an unlikely hero, I guess you could say, or a hero against the world kind of situation that you often get in Redwall stories. It's a tale of vengeance, which is also a big thematic through line. Um, in terms of book, I'd have to go with the fan favorite Moss Flower from the Redwall series. That's sort of the quintessential Redwall story, and very much the kind of adventure and experiences that you can expect to see in Woodlander. Um, you said movie, right?
One movie, yeah.
Um,
Doesn't have to be an animal fantasy movie. It can
no,
be
I know.
something.
I'm just trying to stick to the theme where possible. I'd actually say probably the Lord of the Rings trilogy, maybe Fellowship of the Ring more than the other two, just for the same sort of intimacy of exploring, like venturing out into the wilderness and getting embroiled in larger conflicts.
Yeah. That's more about the journey rather than the
Yes,
destination
that's
sometimes.
that's very much a focus, a concern of Woodlander. Is it's not just about the dungeons, it's not just about the boss fights. It's about going out, experiencing the world, and dealing with what the world presents you with.
Well, there you go, folks. There's three examples. Go out and enrich your life. Read Mossflower. Play Tales of Iron. I actually beat the game recently, so I know all about that game. That's a good game. Feel like Hollow Knight / Souls type of games. Feel like that.
Souls like, yeah.
And yeah, and Lord of the Rings trilogy, which people probably know by now, but
Yeah.
I can always watch the Fellowship of the Ring. If that's on, I'll watch it. I'll watch to the end, the extended edition. I don't care. I like it. So that's pretty much going to summarize what we've got to talk about with the game. We could go on about the rules, minutia
Yeah.
for hours, but the game's 100% complete, and a Kickstarter pre-launch is up now. It's been up for about
a week,
a
just
week and
over
a
a week.
half, 2 weeks. This is your first time running a Kickstarter. How has that been? Has it been a major challenge, like keeping up with it all?
It's been, well, the past week has gone by pretty quick, so it's been not a breeze, but it it hasn't been as demanding as I think it would be if I hadn't had some good help from the team I'm working with to help with the set up the production and shipping and marketing for it. But I've been promoting it on my social media, and it's gathered a good amount of attention, which is nice.
Oh yeah, I think you're at over
But
200
it's a learning
followers today.
experience. I tend to get more like I tend to worry after I've learned more about something, so I don't usually have questions until I'm prompted to question something. So if anything arises, then I'll have questions. But for now, it's been pretty Not lackadaisical, but pretty smooth so far. I'm still waiting to hear back from my collaborators to elaborate on and further define the production costs and the estimates for those.
Okay.
So it's not. We still have some work to do, obviously, but so far it's been going pretty well overall, I'd say.
Yeah, it looks like it. Got a lot of followers. Now, our audience is going to want to know. Now, the Kickstarter is not live, and you've mentioned there is some work that needs to be done there. But do you have an initial funding goal in mind for the physical copy?
The goal we currently have in place, which might be adjusted to suit the cost estimates we're waiting on, as I mentioned. It's currently $5,000 is going to be the goal to fund the printing and the distribution and other concerns.
Very fair. Very fair. That's what I almost always go. That's right around what I aim for as well with my stuff. Now, I know you're still waiting to hear back from your team on some of the production aspects, but have you decided on a printing provider? Is it going to be done overseas in the United States, or?
From what I've been told, I think it's a Chinese-based production company, and there are other things other than the book that are as like stretch goals and add-ons that'll be handled. I'm not sure about the situation for them yet.
Yeah, I saw some special dice might be involved with it.
Yeah, things like dice, little knickknacks like some stickers, bookmarks, things people tend to like. I'm mainly just focused on getting the book out there. That's my primary concern. But I know people like those sorts of things. They appeal to people. So, and they're not going to be troublesome to produce. So might as well offer them to those interested.
Well, in a world where 5th edition and D&D 2024 are waning, people are salivating for new and exciting games. I think this is going to fit that niche very well for any type of high adventure, very detailed type of wilderness exploration game, and with bloody combat, very strategic. You can die easily unless you're like a badger. Then you can still die, but you're going to be pretty powerful. Yeah.
It's easy to get beat up, but it's not as easy to die. Death is sort of on your terms. It's very narrative in that respect. But your character will take a beating. There, you will have lasting battle scars.
Yeah, you can
very easily mess your character up. So
you can
fight when necessary, run when necessary. This isn't. You're not superheroes. You might be able to pull off some action hero stuff if you roll well enough and you plan ahead. But you're not invincible. You're not superheroes. It's a low magic, low fantasy setting. You're not gonna have wizards casting fireballs. There's just a more general spiritualism about the setting. Very, very elemental, very nature focused. So things like fortune tellers, the occasional ghost, those sorts of things you can expect, but you're not going to be like Superman fighting some larger than life super villain.
Danger Mouse.
It is still high fantasy, so like you're still expected to be heroic. Like I said, your actions define your character. So no murder hobos. Your murder hobos aren't going to be encouraged mechanically or hopefully at the table in general. But
well, it helps that they're animals because speaking just from
Yeah.
perspective of realism, it doesn't make sense for a species to like kill itself, right? Like maybe if there's some predatory species, now you do have feral animals in the game like insects and things like that can be dangerous, but why would mice go running around killing themselves? Actually, let's not answer that question because they do that, but no, not in this game. So you're all over social media. You can find you on Twitter. What I'm going to do is I will link first to the Kickstarter pre-launch in the comments below. Make sure to follow that. If you don't follow it, that's fine, and we'll see more posts as the campaign progresses onward. We're constantly going to be talking about it.
Yeah.
And then I'll put some links up there for Alex's art world. He's on X, Blue Sky, DeviantArt, arts, pretty much anything where art is involved. He's up there.
I'm on ArtStation. You can link to my card that has all of my links on it.
Yeah, he's not on Reddit, as I discovered. As I got
my brother's
deleted my Reddit account completely because I tried to share some of his art and some butthurt guys got mad about it. I was so mad.
I don't know what. Yeah, that was disappointing.
Yeah, it's like I got a message. Your thread has been deleted, and I'm like, why? It's like, well, you linked to the artist who made the art, and that counts as a promotional. It's like, what do you mean it's promotional? I'm not being paid to show.
What do you want me to do?
Hello.
Like, yeah,
Reddit is a cesspool.
I'm not angry. I'm just disappointed.
Yes.
Well, you're angry. I'm not. But yeah,
I was angry.
The Kickstarter should be fully launched in about a month, if everything goes well. That's what we're scheduling for. I'll keep people on social media updated if I think of any more insights to post about. You can see what I posted about it there so far over the past week. So hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about what to expect if you do thankfully back the project and get a copy for yourself,
which I highly encourage you to do. So follow Alexander and follow me at Aeres Chronicles. You'll see it right there. That's my name, Aeres Chronicles, at Twitter. Twitter is my main platform. I post there all the time, multiple times a day. Alex is doing all the artwork from beginning to end for our sequel to Shadows of Padvidali, which is our best-selling Ratfolk adventure path book. This time it's an open city sandbox called Nightfall at Thorn Hollow. I've shared a ton of lore and artwork from it already. Keep in mind, Alex does not only draw mice and rats. He's very versatile. He can do humans if you must require that.
Just everyone likes my mice and rats.
Yes.
I'm not even trying to draw a lot of them. People they see it. They're like, hey, I like that. And then they ask me to draw more, and I just keep drawing more.
Right now, his commissions are closed because I've got him by the balls.
Yeah, but and I'm focusing on Woodlander. So
yeah, but that'll open up in the future. And he likes money, so be sure to buy from him. So with that being said, that's the end of our interview today. Alex, I appreciate you having me on. You've been a good guest. And I'm going to upload this on YouTube, hopefully tonight or tomorrow morning. Until then, have a great afternoon.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on. Everyone have a good evening.